Behind me is the Georgia Strait, the Fraser River sockeye. When they come out as baby fry, as smolts, they have to run the gauntlet past 10s, 20, 30 salmon farms. So this really is like trying to thread the eye of the needle. There's wild salmon narrows here, there's a congregation of salmon farms, and a whole coalition of environmental groups, wilderness tourism groups, First Nations groups are calling for these Norwegian companies to get out of the way of these out-migrating smolts. And this call to move the farms is even supported by Marine Harvest's largest shareholder, John Fredrickson, and the former Attorney General of Norway. So it's common sense. We need to save wild salmon, move the farms.
When the salmon farming industry came to my neighborhood, the government said, "This is going to be good for you." And we believed them, and we welcomed them in. But as time went on, there was more and more issues, and as the biologist on the ground, I felt it was my responsibility to record those issues. And government kept ignoring me because it was anecdotal information, so I began publishing. And I engaged in every single government process that came down the pike. And every single one of those processes came up with recommendations that would have prevented the crisis we're in today. But as was mentioned earlier this morning, government has ignored their own reports, their own recommendations. The process that Claire Trevena was part of, saying get the farms out in 5 years, that was ignored. That is exactly how Canada and the world lost the North Atlantic cod. There were scientists within DFO saying, stop fishing, we're catching them before they've spawned. It was that easy. But he was told to be quiet. And within months of the closure of that fishery, the Hibernia oil wells went onto the Grand Banks.
The thing that always struck me when I was speaking with governments, whether it was federal or provincial, is that it felt like I was talking to the company themselves. You know, the government and the fish farm companies are one. Doesn't matter if I was talking to federal or provincial. It was always the same line.
DFO now works for the salmon farming industry. You hear one of these guys talking, it's almost interchangeable with a PR person from Cermak or Mainstream or Marine Harvest or Griggs. I mean, they're saying the same thing. They'll bang their fists on the table and say there's no evidence of any impacts, and yet they say that despite the fact that there is the science that's been done on this has been published in the top journals in the world. You know, the type of journals that are extremely difficult to get into, peer-reviewed by internationally by scientists, top-level scientists, and they say there's no evidence. So that's crazy. You can't say there's no evidence. If that isn't evidence, I don't know what is.
We have been to the rivers where the wild salmon fry come out from their spawning after they leave their spawning beds, and we've seen how clean they are. We see them with no lice on them. We have followed those fry with the guidance of independent researchers up past the farms, and as we got closer to the farms, we saw huge inundations of sea lice from the incubation chambers of the farms onto the wild salmon fry. And we've witnessed the gruesome attacks and what these sea lice do to the wild salmon fry, how they get in the eyeballs and in the gills, and how they utterly destroy these fish. So it doesn't, this whole situation where there's denial on the part of the farms and the government doesn't fly with us, because our operators have seen it.
I guess the thing about this whole thing is, the government, in all those 2 years, they told us this was the best regulated industry in the world. Regulations are fine, but if they're sitting on the shelf, it doesn't mean anything.
When we talk about regulations, there are no real regulations for the health of the fry. It all has to do with the lice counts on the farms, and that all has to do with when the chemicals are applied, and when the salmon come through. And we all know it's been a disaster for years.
My community, we're never told when they're using the neurotoxins on their farms. and the people are digging clams, and we're catching prawns and rockfish, and nobody ever warns us when the drugs are going into our waters. Many of my neighbors had salmon farms come in and site right on top of the grounds where they made their living. The prawn fishermen in particular, I'm thinking, and the rock cod fishermen. And nobody said, hey guys, you know, we're going to do this for you, we're taking over your spot. No, they were just kicked out, left into the dark, figure it out, boys, on your own.
And when we tried to talk to industry about our concerns, we were ignored. They did everything, absolutely everything that local people recommended they not do. They did not take the simplest steps to alleviate the impacts that they were having.
Last night at Quadra Island, we witnessed underwater footage taken by locals out in the wild salmon narrows of the decimation to the ocean bottom in our narrows, and it is not acceptable. We do not want to be repairing our environment. We want to preserve what we have, because what it offers to us is of far more value than what this industry is offering to us.
I think the federal government and the provincial government have bankrolled and supported aquaculture. They've supported the expansion of salmon farming. They've sold wild salmon down the river. And I think wild salmon are in the way. First Nations, fishermen, they're all in the way. If they get rid of wild salmon, get rid of the commercial and recreational fishery, the First Nations fishery, they can expand not just the salmon farming industry, but the oil and gas industry. And the government really is selling off the BC coast.
You know, we could say it's climate, but when the sockeye come out of the Fraser and they turn right, come right past our waters here, come to all these Discovery Islands, the Broughton, those ones are in serious decline. But the other ones from the Harrison, they come out of the river, they turn left and go to the south. Those ones are coming back at twice the numbers. You know, I don't know how many times I've heard, you know, the government say that this won't happen or that won't happen, and yet you always see it happening. You know, the salmon weren't supposed to survive if they escaped. They weren't supposed to make it up the rivers. They weren't supposed to survive.
I love this coast more than anything, and it just I just can't fathom, you know, it going down just because of a handful of big corporations, you know, foreign corporations. Yeah, these guys who have no connection to this area, they're making a lot of money. We're going to lose the most sacred, amazing thing. It's wrong.
We want the politicians to get the message that British Columbians care more about wild salmon than they do farmed salmon, and we want to see our Fisheries Act not degraded to make room for this industry under federal jurisdiction.
Ottawa needs to know wild salmon are essential to British Columbians, to Canadians, to the world. You have an animal that's bringing energy to a huge part of this planet every single year on a schedule. They are a bloodstream. So many things thrive. And I thought for 2 years before I dared say salmon are sacred. But the reason I'm saying that is because everywhere they go, life thrives. Us, our province, our communities, the frogs, the bears, everything. So, like every successful migration, we have to be enormous. So that's my message. It's up to us.
I hope there's a huge wave of support. Really, this is an opportunity for people to stand up and be counted.
And please come out to Victoria on the 8th of May. Walk the whole 30 kilometres that day on the 8th of May, or walk 7 kilometres from Lana Popham's office, walk the last kilometre from Centennial Square, and we'll mass. 10,000 people hopefully will go to the BC Parliament and deliver a message to Ottawa that the people of British Columbia want wild salmon, and they're prepared to stand up for it and send a very powerful signal that wild salmon must come first and the Norwegian-owned salmon farms come second and must move out of the path of wild salmon.
Hey guys, we gotta walk through this all together because they're gonna open the construction up for us. Okay.